Well, on this episode, I'm going to talk about several things. I'm going to get into something that's kind of a passion of mine regarding game show history and culture, talk a little bit about that, and then get into a tribute of the late Bob Barker, who passed away several weeks ago, and I'm a little late talking about him. And then we're going to do a review of a wonderful made-for-TV movie from 1988 called Perfect People, where Priscilla Barnes has a wonderful supporting role. So stay tuned. I know you're going to love it. Hello, once again. Welcome to Frank Weber's Party, another edition. I'm so glad that you could be with me here again today and allow me to share little stories and commentary with you. Tell your friends and family about us. Hit subscribe. Leave me some comments. I would really appreciate that. I wanted to start off today with a little bit of a joke that just came into my mind this weekend. I told my wife, she doesn't like it, of course, but I think it's funny. And I was always thinking, like, if I had ever been an actor, but who knows, maybe something will happen someday, but that's not even really my priority. I really wanted to get more into comedy and maybe even stand up. But I was thinking, if I was an actor, what kind of role would I be very good at and possibly even be typecast in? And I told her, I think I would really like to be an asshole. And I don't mean, of course, the body part, but I mean a rude and boorish person. I think I have a little bit of a practice with that in my life, and sometimes I can be very asshole-ish. You know, actors can certainly slip into and out of certain roles fairly easily. But if you have like some personal experience with it, you would think it would be a little bit easier. So I told her I would like to be an asshole, and she thinks that that's not really good for our image and reputation here as a family. I don't know. I disagree. That's just a little food for thought for you first. So my mind is always contemplating and wondering about things, and notice over the years, so many things have changed. And like I said, sometimes change is good, sometimes it's not, but it can be very overwhelming to me, and I'm always pondering these questions, and one that I've pondered for probably about 25 years now is, outside of The Price is Right, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and Bob Barker, outside of The Price is Right, what happened to morning game shows on the TV networks? And I know a lot of people who are smarter than me or closer to the business would know more about that. Really I would say probably from the 50s to the 90s, sometime in the 90s, the three major networks, if you don't count Fox, which didn't come along until late 80s, I guess, but the three major networks always had at least, it seemed, one morning game show on between, say, 9 and 11 o'clock before the soap operas ramped up. And if you were at home that day, that was really kind of a nice way to start the morning. I'm reminded of a quote that I heard a few weeks back. There's an actor named John Hamm who has been in a number of productions, played Maverick's boss, I believe it was, in the Top Gun sequel that came out a little over a year ago. And he was on Bill Maher's podcast doing an interview and said that when he was growing up in the 70s, he always thought that there was a party every morning at CBS Television City with all these game shows. And I remember that being the case as well in the 80s and even going on into the 90s a little bit. And I don't really know what happened to it, because at some time in the 90s, outside of Price is Right, of course, they stopped doing morning game shows, and the morning schedule got littered with these crazy talk shows Initially, it was like Donahue and Sally Jesse and Geraldo and things like that. But then, of course, they also had the bullshit show, The View, came out, I think, sometime in the 90s. It replaced something called The Home Show. That, of course, competed directly against Price is Right. And The View is such a cesspool now. It really is, all those ladies on there. But anyway, it's sad when you see a certain snapshot of your childhood kind of pass away and move on, as it were. And that's the case of the morning game shows. Of course, they have a couple of game show channels now. And the big thing, of course, is doing a lot of shows at night, which there's a lot of popular shows, including Price is Right, which has done night episodes actually off and on for many years. But then they put a lot of other ones that are very familiar on at night now. And they have a lot of times, not all of them, but a lot of them have kind of this darker feeling to it. And I'm even going back a little far in the past on this, but, you know, when Regis Philbin started doing Who Wants to Be a Billionaire? Wow, that'd be great, huh? Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? They always made this show so dark, you know, less lighting, not as colorful. And then this music that, well, we've got to get this question right. You know, they have that heart-pounding music. The music actually sounds like a heartbeat. And they make every question just so life or death. And, oh, if you don't get this question, I think you go back to zero, I think is the way the show worked. But if you do get this question, then you move on, or maybe you get the $1 million or whatever. And it was just so crazy. And they did that on other shows too. What's the other one? Deal or No Deal. That was kind of a dark show. When you compare it to something like Price is Right, which has always been colorful and is still colorful to this day, even with all the changes over the years in that show, it's just a totally different deal. Some others, of course, went into syndication. Wheel of Fortune used to be on in the mornings, but that's been at night for a long time now, or at least in the late afternoons or evenings on a lot of channels. Of course, Jeopardy, as far as I can remember, has always been syndicated, but I'm just thinking back on that a lot. You know, that's how my mind works. I'm just always wondering what happened to certain things and why. I mean, I still don't quite understand how they got replaced in the morning, but then they changed the whole culture up. And there's several different people who have hosted Family Feud over the years, including that guy, Richard Karn, who was Tim the Toolman Taylor's right-hand guy on his show. He hosted it for a while. And then Louis Anderson, comedian, who is no longer with us, he hosted that show as well. Of course, I always remember Richard Dawson and then Ray Combs for a little while, and then Richard Dawson coming back again, but then Richard Dawson not kissing the ladies at all the second time. I never had a problem with him kissing the ladies, and I thought that was the way it was supposed to be, but there's a lot of gray area in that, and I just wanted to ponder that question, maybe a little food for thought for you. It was a lot different back in those days, and I also remember one other thing that used to make us mad as kids, and we didn't really understand this either. You could talk about this with Price is Right or any of the other shows that were on, like Concentration or Sale of the Century, or was it Password? Card Sharks. I don't know. There's a bunch of different ones that were on. I'm probably leaving some out, which, you know, I can't remember all of them. But back in those days, they would most certainly interrupt the game shows if there was a big news bulletin, you know, if there was some issue between us and the Soviets, or I guess Mount St. Helens erupting, or the big one was in the summer of '87 when they had the Iran-Contra thing. CBS and the others wanted to televise the whole trial. And it was always in the morning, and it was always during The Price is Right. And I'm like, what is this bullshit? I want to watch game shows instead. And that was very frustrating. And I'm sure it still happens every so often. They'll break in for that. But it was that one summer, 1987, it was happening all the time. And there's always something fun about going on those shows. I've never been on one, but I would like to, and see if I could show some knowledge and win a little something and have my pride stroked in some really small way for a little while. So anyway, just to get you thinking and warmed up here today on this show. Anyway, I just mentioned Ray Combs too. He was the host of the Family Feud in the late 80s and early 90s. He was a comedian as well, so that's why I mentioned him. He wound up committing suicide after they brought Richard Dawson back to the production in the mid-90s. And I always enjoyed his show. He was always trying to dance and stuff afterwards. But the main reason I wanted to get into this today is I needed to pay tribute to Bob Barker. He died at the end of August, and I, for some reason, overlooked him and got into a lot of other subjects since then. I would say, as an overall game show host, I probably enjoyed him maybe slightly more than Richard Dawson over the years. I know a little bit about his story. I think he's part Native American, grew up in Missouri, came out to California really to be an actor, and then I think the story after he died is they made him a game show host instead, and the only person that actually allowed him to realize his acting dreams, and the only one that I can recall, is Adam Sandler, particularly in the Happy Gilmore scene when they're playing together in the program and they get into the fight on the golf course. And it's a very classic scene, and then they have something on the internet where they kind of recreated that in a hospital some years later. It was kind of a bizarre scene, but obviously staged and scripted, and it was a lot of fun. But I've talked before about how watching people on TV, you basically let them into your homes and you get to know them a lot over the years. And that was the case for sure with Bob Barker. Now, I know a lot of those mornings I had to go to school or I had to go to work, or maybe it was a rerun. But if you think about it, he started on that show in 1972, went all the way to 2007. They were largely doing 5 shows a week. So over the years, I watched him quite a bit, especially during vacations and sick days. And there was just something magical about the way he ran that show on The Price is Right. And it wasn't his first game show. He was on a show called Truth or Consequences before that went from the 50s to the 70s. And he had a good chemistry, not just with his announcers, particularly Johnny Olson and then Rod Roddy for many years. And since then, it's been kind of a carousel of announcers on that show. But he had a good chemistry with them. And then, of course, he had Barker's Beauties. They were all women back then. There were no male models. I personally like that better, of course. I know he definitely had a relationship with Diane Parkinson, probably starting in the 80s after his wife died. His wife, Dorothy Jo, she died in the early 80s. And I know the other models kind of sued him for various things over the years. And I don't know what that was about. Never really got much into that. But I mean, you do remember Diane Parkinson, Janice Pennington, Holly Hallstrom. I don't know if Janice went after Bob or not for anything. And then there was the first black model was named Kathleen. She was an attractive woman, just like the others. Went after him for something too at one time. But lately I was watching, there's a lot of clips from throughout his years on that show, the 35 years that he did The Price is Right. A lot of clips are on YouTube, especially some really well-produced ones from the early 80s. And I was just watching that, and just a lot of great chemistry with the contestants. He really made the show in the sense of he could really build up suspense, whether they had made the right bid or chose the right price, that sort of thing, and just had a way of really joking with people as well. And I really look up to him for that, really admire him for that. And he, like I said, he truly made that show. It's changed a lot over the years. It's definitely different now with Drew Carey, and nothing against Drew. Also happens to be a comedian, and his show is a little bit different. You know, he seems to say more to the models and maybe perhaps is a little more respectful. I don't know. That's kind of subjective there, but it's always Bob that created that. He has the studio named after him as well for that show. So I've just been thinking about him a lot lately and how he was another one of my TV friends. Was 99 when he passed away at the end of August, so definitely a long, full life. They say that he died from Alzheimer's, which I did not know until he passed. I also know that he was into tanning for a lot of years and he colored his hair for a lot of years. But where I'm kind of going with this is that I kind of look up to him because I've been asking myself about what would success look like on this podcast or with writing or whatever other endeavor that I chose to partake in, try to create something. And besides the obvious answers, I mean, besides being able to entertain people and make people laugh, which is a drug for a lot of people who have a sense of humor and desire in a great way to make others laugh. Obviously, there's that. Remuneration, being able to get paid for this. It's a fancy word for getting paid would be nice. But that money in itself doesn't really make me happy. And I've told people that if I won the lottery, it would be nice. I'd be able to do a lot of things with that, but it wouldn't make me happy. I obviously would appreciate signing autographs, maybe taking pictures with people, and that would be tremendous. But one of the things that Bob Barker, he didn't really do anything in the way that, say, Richard Dawson did on Family Feud when he kissed all the female contestants. But the female contestants on Price is Right would usually come up on stage and plant a little peck on his cheek. They didn't have to, but a lot of them would. And this was all variety of ladies or whatever. I think if something like that were to happen even nowadays, and I would really appreciate that as well. Have the female fans plant a kiss on my cheek. I think that would be wonderful. And the thing is, there's nothing really bad about it. People will give hugs, or they'll shake hands, or they'll do some other kind of contact. Kissing on the cheek isn't much more than those other things, if at all. I mean, it's a sweet gesture. It's kind. It's a way of saying I love you, just like the other ones. But people don't seem to be doing it as much anymore. And it's really kind of sad that that's gone by the wayside. It's not sexual. It's not, what is it? It's not assaulty or anything like that. So I don't really understand where or why it doesn't happen as much anymore. It's kind of sad, but that would be one thing that I would enjoy. That would be a symbol of my success, of course, along with autographs and taking pictures with fans. And then hearing feedback from you would be great as well. Several different methods of doing that. Email would probably be the best for me, but I appreciate whatever you can do. And like I said, I've always said, tell your family and friends about me and hit subscribe, and we'll go from there. So anyway, I hope you enjoy that story. Rest in peace, Bob. We love you. And I'm going to start with a review of a delightful made-for-TV movie from 1988, starring Priscilla Barnes. Well, she's actually co-starring in a very supporting role, one of the main characters, called Perfect People. And it's got a nice message as well as being mostly funny. And we'll be right back with that. All right. Welcome back. I wanted to review this made-for-TV movie called Perfect People from 1988. I couldn't find any network information or what the exact original air date was. But I find this to be a comedic and poignant movie at the end, and some of the things that America or people in America were doing back in the late 80s and are still doing a lot of now. Let me go ahead and start off and tell you about who this stars. First of all, the main star is Lauren Hutton, who is a very beautiful woman, still beautiful woman today. She's still alive and started off as a model. She's famous for having the gap in her upper teeth. We call that in dentistry diastema. And she's been in several movie productions over the years. I remember her a lot from Zorro the Gay Blade with George Hamilton, obviously a recommendation there. And so she plays the wife of this couple named Barbara. And she's married to a guy named Ken, who's played by someone named Perry King, who has a very distinctive voice, just like Lauren Hutton does. I think he may have voiced some commercials and was in a few other productions that I'm not sure if I've seen. And they have a daughter, Irene, that's played by Cheryl Pollack. Barbara has a mom that's played by June Lockhart. Obviously, she was the mom on Lassie, I believe, back in the black and white days. And in the late 80s, June Lockhart was probably doing the Depends commercials, if I recall correctly. She's actually one of the few people who have passed away from this movie. Most people are still alive. And the other two, or three mentions, actually. You have David Leisure, who played Joe Isuzu during this time and was in a couple of airplane movies. He plays Derek, who's a co-worker of Ken's at a stockbroking firm, because back in the day they were brokers, if you recall. And we have, of course, the lovely Priscilla Barnes, who is a co-worker of Barbara's at a real estate agency, a very outgoing, flirty, vivacious single woman. And also Karen Valentine, who plays Margot, who's also a co-worker of Ken's at the brokerage firm. So what happens is Ken and Barbara, they're in their 40s and they're approaching their 20th wedding anniversary, and they would like to go to Europe. And they have flashbacks of their little honeymoon in Mexico 20 years ago, and they said they would always love each other and everything. And in this movie, they're really only supposed to be in their 40s, but initially they are done up with wigs and makeup to look much older than that, it seems like. And their daughter, Irene, is going off to college. And they feel like they're getting older and they need to recapture their youth. And through some initial prodding at work, so in Barbara's case, Amy, played by PB, she said that she got divorced and then she started going to clubs and taking up tennis and dancing and all this stuff, and it really reinvigorated her life. And then Derek, who's the coworker of Ken was really kind of worried that he might lose his job. He saw a guy getting laid off there at his office and says, you can't just sit behind a desk and call people on the phone anymore. You got to go out and make eye contact with them and everything. And so this starts this little quest that extends throughout much of the movie about how to regain this youthful figures and vigor, if you will. And they started by exercising initially. They had a gym membership, but then canceled that, spent a lot of money on a home gym, and then they start getting into diets and vitamins, all natural foods, and then diet pills. And then they go to like salons for a little bit and, do a number of things there. And then we start getting into hair plugs for Ken and some plastic surgery for Barbara. And they're on this never-ending quest. And about halfway through the movie, they look very youthful and in shape and invigorated, and they're getting a lot more attention now from other people. They actually go to a club once, and they are kind of hit on by a couple of, I guess you could say, younger folks. But the thing is that this is never really ending, and we reach a point in the movie where Barbara thinks Ken is cheating on his coworker Margot, but really Margot is just giving him some advice, and she had been through a tough breakup and actually gets back together with her boyfriend named Harry. And she basically tells him, like, well, maybe you just need to get to know your wife a little bit more to truly reinvigorate the love that they had. And so he tries to do that one time, bring some flowers, but then Barbara caught him taking a walk out on the docks with Margot and thought he was cheating with Margot when he wasn't. And then Barbara decides to leave him, and then Ken tries to go chasing her down there on the road and winds up taking his eye off the road and runs into a garbage truck, winds up in the hospital. And then at that point, nobody dies, but they begin to understand what they really have. And chasing after all these things isn't the most important thing, but it's about the love that they have and rediscovering each other that really cures their relationship. So that's kind of a quick and dirty summary of that. People always kind of make fun of made-for-TV movies, which I guess they don't really have as much of anymore except on cable. Hallmark movies. But I would give this one a definite A+ because it's full of laughs, and you're going to really enjoy yourself at all the different characters. Priscilla is hilarious in this. I think David Leisure, of course, was always hilarious, and I don't really know what happened to him. I know he was in a show, he was in a TV show with Richard Mulligan around that time as well. I don't know what happened to him, but anyway, it's a great message, great family-friendly movie. I would highly recommend it. It's available pretty much everywhere well, not everywhere, but it's widely available on the internet, not necessarily DVD or anything, but I think you can find it a couple of places on YouTube and a couple of streaming services. I would give the movie, like I said, about an A+. Priscilla's performance, I'd give her an A+ as well. I think it was really good, and hopefully I summarized that pretty well for you. Trying to think about if there were any other scenes that really came to mind that really stood out. It's a very quintessential 80s movie. It's got the soundtrack and some popular songs from the time. But it holds up even today. I think a lot of it is about, it's great that we have all this technology, medical technology, and people can, whether they stay healthy through working out and going to a gym, or I wouldn't really recommend diet pills, but eating right. But then also the technology as far as plastic surgery. Hopefully you're doing it for the right reasons. I know everybody wants to look good, but it's difficult to look good forever. I brought up the thought, some people think that, let's just talk about a couple of Priscillas here. Priscilla Presley had some fairly bad plastic surgery a few years ago, and I don't know what the story was behind that. I mean, she's absolutely beautiful in the Naked Gun movies, if you remember seeing those, and I don't know what happened there. Some people think Priscilla Barnes had plastic surgery. Her face is kind of, as she's aged, I don't want to be mean or anything, maybe kind of jowly, or her cheeks have kind of drooped down a little bit, but I don't think that's because she had plastic surgery. I could be wrong. But there are a couple of people leaving comments out there, not on my page, but on like YouTube and stuff. I think she's had that surgery, but I'm really kind of doubtful of that. But anyway, sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not. Just kind of depends on where your priorities are. But if you have a loving family, a loving spouse, you have a lot already, is what I should say. So that was the point of the movie. But anyway, that's about all I have for this episode. I believe this is, unless I change it up again like I did last time, this is probably going to be episode number 19 already. And thank you for joining me. Like I said, tell folks about me and leave comments. Really appreciate it. And for now, this is Frank Weber signing off from Frank Weber's Party. The theme song is called Retro Funk by Soul Prod Music. It is available at pixabay.com.